Welcome to Episode 6 of the CALS Report, your insider's guide to the ever-evolving world of college sports leadership. I'm Will Reese, co-founder of Next Level Sports and proud CALS director since 2011. This episode of the CALS Report podcast is brought to you by Teamworks, the operating system for sports. Trusted by over 5,000 teams, Teamworks is a strategic partner helping collegiate athletic departments navigate change, streamline operations, and deliver an exceptional student-athlete experience. Learn more at teamworks.com. In this episode, Ryan Bradley sits down with SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey for an exclusive deep dive into the future of college athletics. Greg unpacks the House settlement, the path towards a new normal, and the leadership required to navigate change in today's shifting landscape. He also shares his thoughts on the SEC's historic basketball season, lessons learned from the first ever 12-team college football playoff, and the importance of consensus building in shaping the future of the sport. Plus, he offers a personal look at the strategies that have driven his leadership and career growth. Then, we step into the lobby for a career-focused roundtable featuring three senior leaders from the American Athletic Conference: Joe Fields of Tulsa, Jessie Gardner of North Texas, and Jana Woodson of Tulane. They take questions from graduate assistants who interned at CALS 24 in Fayetteville, sharing insights on building a successful career in college athletics, leadership strategies for long-term impact, and the mindset needed to grow and thrive in a competitive industry. This episode is packed with leadership, wisdom, career advice, and an insider's perspective on the biggest issues shaping college athletics today. Coming up next, Ryan Bradley and SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey kick off Episode 6 of the CALS Report, where the conversation continues long after the event ends.
It's time now for the big interview here on the CALS Report podcast. I'm Ryan Bradley, and I'm excited to be joined today by the Commissioner of the Southeastern Conference, Mr. Greg Sankey. Greg, thanks for joining us. Thanks for making time. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation, and look forward to the next few moments.
Absolutely. Let's dive in. So I think it's important that we timestamp this conversation given the fluidity of everything that's happening in college athletics right now. We're talking here in early February 2025 with a potential settlement in the House case on the horizon and renewed reports of potential congressional intervention. It appears like college athletics could finally be on the verge of moving forward to a new normal, maybe even a new level of stability compared to the rapid changes we've seen in recent years. Is that wishful thinking, or do you foresee a viable path forward that will bring the clarity and stability to these issues that we've been looking for here in the near future?
In my opinion, and I want to be intentional that it's my opinion or my thinking when I say those things, and others will have different perspectives, there's an opportunity for more stability based on a framework established through this legal process. As we deal with the timestamp, we're at the conclusion of an opt-out and objection period, and so most of the reporting has been about those with levels of criticism around the proposed settlement. Some of those seem to be recycled arguments, others are novel. And eventually we're going to have a court decide whether the settlement moves forward or not. What's important is there are key implementation needs as part of that settlement, and there's a responsibility to try to meet those needs in as timely a manner as possible, with the idea that we'll have a structure set up ahead of that final hearing in early April. I think what that indicates is there's no easy button to be pushed on any of these solutions. And there is the opportunity for certainty, but that certainty comes from what I would call decades of change being made in weeks and months. And all of that's enormously complex, and rightly so. What we do is diverse in Division I. It's diverse among even the four conferences that exist as that power group, as people use that label. The issues are historic, and the decisions are also historic in their implications. And so all of that is an outline of why I think there's an opportunity here, but people have to commit to make the opportunity work effectively.
So we know a lot of it hinges on the decision of Judge Wilkin in early April. What are some of the other hurdles that need to be cleared and some of the issues that folks are going to have to come together and work on in order to get to that new level of stability come fall of 2025?
It strikes me as first, the universities involved in their athletics programs and the people around their athletics programs have to commit to a structure and making that structure work. And what we've seen since really 2019, so over 5 years, is at a state legislative level or governor's level or attorney general level, if an institution decides, or a state with several institutions decide it has different interests or different desires, it acts through an executive order, legislation, or litigation. And we can't have a national competitive structure with that kind of backdrop or that kind of foundation with a set of basically 50 different standards. So I'd submit that's one. I referenced earlier steps around implementation, around reporting the distribution of revenue through the proposed cap system or structured system, the reporting and oversight of name, image, and likeness activity that's consistent with a fair market value and has real business purposes. That does not seem to be central to a lot of the deals that are reported. I also think we have to go beyond some of these issues proposed in the settlement to think about, I'll call it consumer protection for young people involved. There are a lot of entities around that represent themselves as something. Whether it's an NIL agent, a deal representative, simply a quote-unquote advocate. There are those with their own economic and relevance interests that have offered ideas. I think we have to be very careful about those and somehow have a level of consumer protection, if you will, afforded to the young people involved in our athletics programs who are often approached with these offers or opportunities. I think there's been a lack of analysis and reporting about offers that don't materialize or promises unfulfilled. And those really should be unacceptable in any kind of system around higher education and the athletics programs embedded in those educational institutions. So those are but a few changes. And I think there are likely second and third order issues that will require adaptation. There are high-level issues around governmental policy at the federal and state level. There are others who've indicated interest in pursuing new and novel litigation. So there's still work ahead, but there is an opportunity, as I've described.
Switching gears a little bit here, it's been a historic season for the SEC in basketball in terms of non-conference wins, national rankings, the overall growth of the sport throughout the league. Those who've been paying attention know this didn't happen by accident. What has driven this success that we're seeing in the 2024-2025 season, and how do you see this trajectory playing out for SEC basketball moving forward?
I think the headline is great decisions at a campus level, whether it's hiring or support or facilities. That provides the basis for recruiting young people that are highly talented and highly committed to their success and their team's success. If you go back to March of 2016, Selection Sunday was one of those bad days. That was my first year. I was, I think, technically in my 9th or 10th month as commissioner. And we had only 3 SEC teams selected to participate in the NCAA tournament. And one of those 3 was assigned to the opening round in Dayton. That was Vanderbilt's men's basketball team. The 2 other teams, Kentucky and Texas A&M. Texas A&M advanced to the Sweet 16, where they were eliminated in Anaheim by Oklahoma's team. And that just did not meet the standards we had for ourselves. And we had a really important athletics directors meeting the Wednesday before that Selection Sunday, where we were going down a path of some other policy issues that I thought were ill-informed. And I had allowed those to develop. They had been under construction before I became commissioner. And I interrupted the meeting and said, look, we're not doing that. And my concern at the time was we as a group, when we came together, were not talking about the right issues around our basketball programs. We talked a lot about the RPI that existed back in the time, and how do we schedule, and when do we schedule, and do we have different flex games? I appreciated the creativity, but it didn't seem to be going at the core issue. And what I had done is return to the previous decade or so. I went back to about 2004. In the 90s, early 2000s, we had a great run of success as a league in a number of programs. And we just had not achieved that consistent level of success. Or during that time period, Florida had won those back-to-back championships. 2012, Kentucky had. We didn't have the depth. And I think what you're seeing now is a product of the right conversations about the right issues, the great campus decision-making that I mentioned, the commitment to our programs, the adaptation to the environment that's emerged over the last few years. It's produced just historic success. And in looking at history, I think you have to go back to like 02, 03 in our non-conference success. And we expect our programs to play high-level games. Our non-conference success, you have to go back, I think, to its 02, 03 era with the ACC, and we still have a higher non-conference winning percentage than that league had, and that's the best over decades. You go back to an old 8-team ACC for a stat I literally read last night, which was all 8 of those teams in their non-conference schedule had a 750 winning percentage or above. All of our 16 teams achieved that this year, again, against remarkable non-conference competition. So the depth and the strength, the high-level wins that were there as we began our conference play were predicated on really strong non-conference scheduling and then success in that scheduling. And that's gone back over years of conversation about the right issues and really great decision-making at the campus level.
Yeah, so you laid out basically a 9-year timeline from when those conversations started to the fruits that it's bearing today. Is there a roadmap there that you all have developed and the campuses have developed that can be utilized to strengthen other sports in the SEC portfolio?
When we had this conversation with our basketball coaches, our men's basketball coaches one year, I said, they said, well, what do you expect? And I said, I expect you to perform like our softball teams do. And they're like, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, all 13 of them are selected to participate in the NCAA tournament. And everybody kind of had the awkward laugh, like, yeah. I said, you know what? You should laugh, because had I said that maybe 10 years ago, that every one of our softball teams would regularly be selected to participate in the NCAA tournament, people would have laughed, said, well, that's really not possible, yet we've done it over and over and over. So why shouldn't we have that same high expectation across all of our sports? And national championships success as being part of the sport. I think one of the proud moments for me was Kentucky's 2021 in April, what would have been the 2020 season that was disrupted by COVID, their national championship, because that was our first, and that was a sport where we had never won a national championship. So, Ryan, I answer the question in that way, saying across the board we have, I think, consistent expectations to always have teams represented in the Final Four, if you will, of a national championship endeavor, to always have somebody positioned for a national championship, to earn those national championships on a consistent basis. And that's where in men's basketball, we weren't meeting our own expectations. We were doing that in women's basketball. We were doing that, as I mentioned, in softball and baseball. We were emerging closer and closer to the top in volleyball, and closer to the national championships again at the time in women's soccer. And I think having the consistent reinforcement of those expectations is key. I'll just add one other component. When we went through the research, the onboarding of the NCAA's academic progress or performance program was a bit of a disruptor in my view. Back in the mid-2000s, we had a lot of coaching change. We didn't have continuity at the coaching level, and you always had turnover when you had changes in coaches. And we looked at our rosters, And we looked at our APR numbers, and you had people who couldn't adjust or had to be very intentional as they were onboarding new coaches, and probably retain some people because they had to have roster stability to get that APR number up. And again, that's where I go back to the campus level support to make sure we're not in that position again in this current environment.
Just a few weeks removed from the finality of the first expanded college football playoff, what are your initial thoughts on how it played out, both as commissioner of the SEC and as someone who is involved in the shaping of this format? What worked well? Were there any surprises? What are some of the things that might need fine-tuning moving forward?
We want to be at the top of the mountain at the end of the season, and we were not. We came up just a bit short. So you're going to go back internally and think through things. I think from a big picture, so stepping away from the SEC commissioner's role and looking at college football, my view is it was the right time for this expansion. I'm not so sure, even though there were really good teams in like the 5 or 6 spot over the past few years. I'm not sure we had as many teams that could have been competitive in the playoff as we had this year. So I think what we saw, the expansion brought teams into the conversation throughout the season, particularly late in the season. It provided some discussion and opportunities that were new. I think we have to be careful about those discussion points from just the media making observations and commentary and look substantively. And when I do look substantively, I think it was the right time to expand. I think 12 was a healthy number. My view is that the conference champion access was entirely appropriate. I do think we have to understand more about the selection committee evaluation process and how decisions are made and teams provided access or not provided access. We had an incredibly strong non-conference record, particularly against the ACC, and I look forward to having some dialogue with selection committee members about how decisions were made and distinctions were made. I do think when you go back to the 12-team format being introduced, we had the Pac-12 as it was historically known in place. We hadn't had the movement of Oklahoma and Texas. We had not had the expansion of the Big Ten, ACC, and Big 12. At the time of implementation, there was the inability or the refusal to make much change during that time of transition. And so we now have a real life experience where you have to question the seeding process versus the ranking process. And I think that has to be looked at even this year. Understand any change for 25 requires a unanimous vote of the participants. So we should set our expectations relatively low, given some of the turbulence in past decisions. But I think it's a relevant conversation. There's plenty of commentary about, well, every team that received the bye lost. I think that's something that requires a deeper analysis. So at least 2 of those teams were underdogs because of the seeding process brought into the byes that were lower rated teams. And so the fact that those teams did not win their game, it could have been foreseen based on the ranking. So I don't think that's something that causes a lot of disturbance or surprise. The 1 and 2 seeds, though, played in unique games. Ohio State, Oregon was a rematch. Kind of anything can happen. And obviously, Ohio State, after the Michigan game, had a great focus in producing the national championship, and credit to that team and their leadership. And then Notre Dame, Georgia was, a close game. And all these games should be close games if we get it right. So I think you can over-focus on that 0-4 record. I think looking more deeply informs kind of the why, and then causes us to need to ask some questions about how the bracket's constructed, or maybe reseeding occurs after the first round. I think campus games, I was in Austin, were healthy. I think we should be careful about just saying we're going to go to a bunch more. I think bowl games do have a place. And some of this movement and preparation is really difficult on our staffs as we go into basketball seasons. And even our programs that have enormous staffs, we have to be thoughtful before we just jump to something that worked in one round, but it may not be quite as victorious, if you will, a moment as what we saw this year in the first rounds if we just extend it.
When you're making decisions and recommendations, whether it's about the college football playoff, access to the NCAA tournament, many of the other issues of our day, you have a really strong voice in those decision-making processes. How do you balance what's best for the SEC with what's best for the overall health of the sport and the enterprise?
First of all, I think one's really honest about they show up as a representative of the Southeastern Conference. I do think there's times when that role and title has to be, to the extent it can be, put aside to look at the bigger picture. I'm actually one who said repeatedly, we did not need playoff expansion in the current cycle. We did not need early playoff expansion. Even after we moved to 16 teams, adding the historic success of Oklahoma and Texas, we were going to be fine with having teams in the mix for the 14 playoff format. And so I think that's one where we took a step back and looked at, we'd have more access, but to bring people into the game. And that's where you have to remember how things have shifted. You really, when we were going through the process of expansion, prior to last season, when Washington made the playoff, you had to go back to 2016 to find a team west of the Rocky Mountains that had been in the national playoff. And I think as we look at college football needing to be a national game and having strength and developing momentum, even at the high school level, that's why I'm very cautious about just playing Friday night games. I think we need to understand the building blocks of our programs are on high school Friday nights and should be respecting that more. Others have made different decisions. I also think that having national competition for national championships is really important. And I spoke of volleyball and softball that years ago were viewed as kind of West Coast sports. The success we've had, I think, has made the sport better. And so you transition that to football. We didn't need an expanded playoff, but how do you bring people into the conversation? Because we want football to be relevant across the country at the college level and to motivate high school programs as well. I think that's a really good indication. I do think we have to push on our NCAA structures to allow more authority in decision making. That's been reported that we've identified that. We have pretty narrow autonomy when you think about it. I think the expectations, the pressures, the resources, the personnel around our programs are such that we have to think differently about how we make decisions in big rooms. I think the autonomy process that has existed has proven to be beneficial across Division I as student athletes have post-eligibility health care now, or concussion protocols, or cost of attendance funding access. Those things didn't exist unless those of us at this higher competitive level had pushed for autonomy and decision making. And I think all of those are representative of the ability to put aside some narrow competitive consideration and think more broadly about all of college athletics. And I hope we can come together at a time of change to acknowledge that we just can't go on as we have over the last decades of college sports. We need different decision-making models, and authority has to be allocated. Yeah, we have a responsibility, for example, to make March Madness happen. America wants Hoosiers every March, right? They want Normandale with a rolled-up program and an upset or two. And I hate it when those are our teams that are upset, and I understand that value. But some of the elements around supporting that are going to have to adapt so that we can make sure that those moments can still take place in the future.
All right, we can't do a podcast with Greg Sankey without diving into leadership and leadership principles. I want to start with consensus building, which you just touched on a little bit. As the leader of one of the most high-profile organizations in all of sports, you're regularly working with university presidents, athletic directors, coaches, trying to get those folks on the same page. When you're in those moments when you need to build consensus among those key stakeholders, what are some of the leadership principles you rely on? And are there any specific examples that come to mind when you think about a time when you had to use a lot of concerted effort and strategy to get everybody on the same page and arrive at an important decision?
We probably go on for like hours about some of those. I've told our full staff, we have full staff meetings, or certain times of the year, and we're heading into one of those. where when you see me walking out the door at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's not like I'm going home to put my feet up on my desk in my home office. I'm going to a campus for a meeting. And I said, fundamentally, I think I've recognized I'm in sales. So if I see somebody down the back hallway as I'm headed out our back door to my car, I'll say, well, I'm going on a sales call. And I think that if you think about it in that way, decision making in organizations is built upon relationships and information and communication. And I think that's a really challenging piece of the role right now, because there is so much information. You just think about what's happened over the last few days. We talked about kind of the timestamp here and the end of an opt-out and objection standpoint. There's so much information that ends up on people's phones to which they react. And so the opportunity to counter or expand upon or contextualize that information is needed. And so I would go back to, how do you bring people together? More time in communication. I think there are times where you're going to let the communication be reduced, give people space to think. And then you want to come together, whether it's individually and as groups. I think you have to change your operating rhythm. That was one of the lessons out of COVID, where we had this nice, comfortable cadence to meetings and conference calls or video conferences. Back then it was kind of conference calls. Now it's video conferences. And during the COVID experience, that operating rhythm, that calendar of video conferences changed completely. We weren't meeting in person for long periods of time all of a sudden. So we've learned from that. We've continued through that. At some point, you have to make decisions. Doug Dickey was the athletics director at the University of Tennessee the first year of my predecessor, Mike Slive. And there was a vote that was, we were a 12-team league, and so it was a 7-5 vote. And Mike Slive was bothered by that, and Doug could see that. So at a break during the meeting, he said, "Hey, Commish, what's wrong?" And he said, "Doug, we just had this vote. It's 7-5. We couldn't get everybody on the same page. It's just going to be controversial and come up and come back." And Doug put his arm around Mike and said, "Commission, this league, 7-5 is 12-0 when we leave the room." And we work to reinforce that. We want to have people buy into that culture. Sure, they should voice their perspective. We should have what one of my presidents labeled strategic disagreement inside the room. But when a decision's made, we're going to turn the page and go forward. And hopefully we can socialize those expectations, and those can be internalized among our key campus leaders.
I heard an interview you gave recently where you shared that a staff member asked you, how much of your day is spent on black and white issues and how much of it is spent on gray? You said 90% gray. How do you get comfortable operating with so much ambiguity? And what are the skills needed to be an effective leader when you're navigating uncharted waters seemingly all the time?
I don't think the comfortable is a word I'm allowed to use. And I think that's one of the things that maybe from the outside looking at someone, it's perceived that way. But there's a churning or a turmoil. And I saw John Swofford, the retired now ACC commissioner, at a dinner in Atlanta around the college football playoff. And I hadn't seen John since before his retirement. And I went to his retirement celebration. It was the night before the news story broke about Oklahoma and Texas moving. I knew that was going on. And I watched John at his retirement event behind the podium speaking, thinking, man, it's got to be nice not to have your stomach feeling in knots the way mine did that night, knowing that this opportunity with Oklahoma and Texas exists. And I told him that story. And I think that's representative of leadership roles is, you never want to portray some of the difficulties. You want to provide a level of steady leadership. At least I do. Never let them see you sweat is a bit of a mantra. But you've got to recognize the difficulties. And we've talked about a difficult set of circumstances. I think one of the challenges now in leadership in college sports compared to say COVID, like COVID was undefined. There was no playbook, but there was a rallying cry. You could say, we want to get back to something normal. We want to get back to play. And people can understand that and work towards that goal. You could almost print that on T-shirts, even though we never did. Now you're trying to resolve lawsuits. You're trying deal with state legislation. You're trying to deal with state level litigation. You're trying to deal with congressional issues. It's not like you can print that on a T-shirt and people rally around it. I think we're coming to this tipping point where we acknowledge we can't go on as we are. And then how do you help bring people into the solution from a leadership standpoint? I think that's the challenge that's in front of us. And how do you bring those relational aspects, those communication aspects to it? And what's difficult is I think there are a lot of disparate thoughts. There are a lot of different points of information. And we have to consolidate our thinking around a certain set of objectives. And that's really challenging in this environment.
I want to talk to you a little bit about CALS. This is the CALS podcast. We had the pleasure of having you serve as our opening night speaker at CALS 2022 in Nashville. A very memorable conversation between you and Candace Lee, the athletic director at Vanderbilt. Looking back on that, what are your memories from that conversation with Candace, your impressions of CALS, and the importance of events like CALS for industry professionals?
I had never been invited to attend CALS until that moment, and so I didn't know what to expect. So the first was not knowing what to expect. I think the encouraging point for me was the next step leaders, if you will. So those who are in leadership positions poised to take that next step. That's why I use that phrase, coming together with people kind of in the end of hallway positions for some conversation, for some thinking time. And I think one of the threats, given the level of activity and intensity in college athletics, is we all lose time to think and time to prepare and time to reflect on our direction. And so I thought first that was a great opportunity. Second, Will sent me a photo of Candace and I on stage during the interview. And I remember walking up on the stage and he had this window into the city behind us. And it was a beautiful night and just a spectacular view. And it was a wow moment. And so when I opened the photo, there was this photo of Candace and I on the stage where I'm answering, she's asking the questions, I'm trying to answer them, in that backdrop of the city. And it's actually in my hallway. I walk by it every day. It hangs on the wall. And I think what you see in the photo is a relationship that was built between Candace and myself. I grew up in upstate New York. She spent a lot of time in Huntsville, Alabama. She went to Vanderbilt. I'm a Cortland State graduate. I showed up here as an associate commissioner early in her career, and we've worked together now for over 20 years in a variety of different capacities. I don't think either of us would have kind of penciled out that chronology of our relationship. We've had laughs and we've had hard moments, and it was just a rewarding conversation. I think what you saw, what I remember, is that relationship playing out in the back and forth. And I think that photo that I mentioned shows that as well. So there's a beautiful skyline, a great setting, hundreds of people listening, but a familiarity and a relaxation between two friends that have a long-time relationship, having a little bit of fun and trying to provide some perspective. Those are my takeaways, and that may be a little bit too internal for me, but that's what was happening, and it was a really special evening in my view.
I would agree, and speaking with lots of folks that have been to many CALS throughout the years, it certainly sticks out as one of the more memorable events and conversations that we've had an opportunity to listen to. So we again appreciate your willingness to engage with CALS and the CALS community. All right, it's no secret.
I'll give you one more note. Like one of the lessons for me in this role, and it was in I think 2017, so I was a year and a half in as commissioner. I went to a press conference, and I realized that I would go to these press conferences, and we had a particularly bad day around that press conference. Kind of big picture, some decisions had been made, some personnel changes. And I was asked anything and everything: hurricane disruption, committee on infractions decisions, personnel changes. It was a hard 45 minutes. I came back to our next full staff meeting. I said, you know what? I realized everybody else has permission to ask me anything. And so we actually have on our staff meeting, whenever we get together, an Ask Greg Anything section where I said, you know what? You have permission to ask me anything. You know, I may not answer, but you can ask. And I generally do answer. And I'll go back to that night. I remember one of the preparatory conversations was, hey, you'd like to go through questions. I'm like, just ask what you're going to ask, and I'll do my best to answer. And so that was part of the enjoyment for me was, hey, I don't know what's going to come out from a question standpoint, and we'll see how those answers might be shaped.
Well, we always appreciate your honesty and your candor. It's no secret that you're a real process and personal growth junkie. You regularly share the books that you read on social media. People have noticed and taken note that you're a voracious note taker. As you gather all this information, how do you integrate it into your work, your personal life? And are there any recent insights or habits that have really made an impact on how you lead?
Going back decades now in my reading, so I always read with a highlighter. In fact, I have two screens going, and in preparation, I pulled up what I'll reference in a bit. So I read with a highlighter, and then for years, I would try to find time where I would take the highlighted portions, compile them into notes, save them, and behind me, there's actually a notebook that got to be too thick. Now it's all electronic copies of my reading notes. So I would distill a book down to what I highlighted as really impactful or memorable statements. And then when our two daughters kind of got into junior high, were learning typing and computer skills, I wish I could say this was this great parenting strategy. It was an efficiency strategy for me because I was behind in typing my book notes. I said to our daughters, I'll pay you $10 a book if you'll take the highlighted portions, here's the format, here's the expectation, and type my notes. And what I didn't think about from just a learning standpoint is they read the best parts of all the books I read. And without telling me, they would save those for themselves. And so we're now decades into that. And I have somebody here who provides me some administrative support help as I read to prepare those notes. And those are sent out to a really small list, like my wife and two daughters. So they still have the chance to consume the best parts of the books that I read. And I think that was a really important leadership skill because I will go back to books I read 20 years ago and pull a note. And I have this whole inventory on a computer. If you're at an athletics directors meeting, and presumably some of our athletics directors will meet, not all the time, but regularly we'll take quotes from books that I think are relevant to our conversation. And as you walk in the room, there'll be a PowerPoint display of slides with quotes that just circulates through as kind of an entry point into our meeting. And I don't know that anybody actually, I do know that some read that because when I forget to display those or I have a different strategy for the opening and they're not there, I'll be asked. But I mean, that's a continuum of, I like to read books. I always read with a highlighter, prepared notes. I involved other people in that process to be more efficient. It produced benefits in my family I never would have imagined because there were dinner conversations about a book I read. And I used books, whether it's new or old, sets of notes that inform some of our meeting environments or atmospheres.
I've personally taken inspiration from your approach to reading, both with the highlighter, but also with my own children when they've gotten older. When one of my kids gets in trouble, the best way to punish them is to take away their phone, right? That's the most important thing in the world to them. So the deal I make with them is I give them a book that I've read and highlighted on personal professional development. And I say, you get your phone back when you've read this book and you can produce a book report, a quick summary on each chapter that proves to me you actually read it. And over time, they've been forced to learn some things that hopefully have been applicable in their lives. So some of that came from hearing you describe the way that not only you read and absorb the information, but how you pass it on to your children as well, which I think is just brilliant. All right. Before we move on, I got to ask you, best book you read last year, what's on your reading list for 2025?
Yeah, so I actually started looking through and like the boiling down, 40 or so books into like the best one is enormously problematic. And I went back and I happened to read two books kind of back to back. I don't know if they were best, but it was a really enjoyable set of reading experience. One was John Meacham's book on Abraham Lincoln, and There Was Light is the name of that book. And then I read the book The Demon of Unrest by Eric Larson. And so those are both Civil War based. Lincoln's or Meacham's book on Lincoln is a biography, really heavily weighted onto his presidency, but doesn't ignore all that led up to that, because I think that's an important set of formative realities that are lost as you focus on maybe just the leadership moment. And then Larson's book was about the strife and unrest in the nation leading up to Fort Sumter, and kind of a play-by-play, and really interesting to connect those two independent timelines of intersecting moments in American history, great difficulty, but really interesting illumination to read the chronology from a very human standpoint. I think we miss those things. So those are two. I read, a book is stark as, How to Win an Information War, which went back to World War II and what was happening in Great Britain to counter German misinformation and disinformation, and how some of that plays out today. One of the really two interesting authors, Joshua Robinson and Jonathan Clegg, they wrote The Club, which was about the Premier League and its development over time. They wrote a book on Formula One and the business background of Formula One that I found really interesting. So I could go kind of on and on about the books I read. There was a book called The End of the World is Just the Beginning. I was trying to find out the author that just looks at kind of geopolitical issues around the globe, the importance of global shipping for our economies, things you don't realize, and the advantages we have here in North America at a time when we're talking about trade and tariffs and things like that. It was pretty interesting. I'll finish at the end of the year. I read a book called Revolutionary Roads, which was about Revolutionary War history, and the author really getting in his car and traveling to these places and finding monuments that may be behind shopping centers now in New Jersey, where Washington made some key decisions, or the effort to relocate cannons from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston around the origins of the Revolutionary War and what that took. And somebody who just got in a car and went and saw these places and traveled to them to tell the history was an illuminating read.
You're now in your 10th year as the commissioner of the SEC, but I want to ask you about your first day on the job. How did you feel when you stepped into that office, and how did you spend your first day in the office?
Well, my official start was June 1st, and we had just finished our spring meetings in Destin on Friday. The transition time was a bit unknown until my predecessor, Mike Slive, in that press conference on his last day said, "This is it for me." So the next day I had planned to stay. I did stay in Destin just to catch my breath before it all began. I was by the pool and my phone rang, and it was one of our athletics directors who was on fire in the moment because one of our campus leaders had offered some quotes that made it into the media that were a little bit inconsistent with what we had discussed. And it was like, what are you going to do about this? You're the commissioner now. And so the notion that you could have an off day was removed from me that in that moment. I'm like, hey, it's like my first day being in charge. This really didn't get said when I was commissioner. So, and he came right back at me. And so we had some cleanup work right there. So that literally was my first day. I thought there'd be no controversies. We were in NCAA tournament play for baseball and softball, nice quiet moment, and it got blown up. And then I'll tell you one of the cool moments, and it happened over here. So this office in which I'm located for our podcast has been remodeled since 2015. So June 8th was a Saturday, and it was moving day for Mike Slive to move out of the office he'd occupied for the previous 13 years and my day to move in. So my first day was unpacking boxes. Mike and I had 45 minutes, and I turned my phone on, And what was interesting is, without saying a word, neither of us sat behind the commissioner's desk. So it's a desk he had occupied for 13 years. I had met with him hundreds upon hundreds of times and always sat in front of the desk, and he was behind the desk where the commissioner's chair was. Well, that day, I pulled up a side chair to the side of the commissioner's desk, and he sat in one of the chairs that I sat in for years. And I told him after I had turned my phone on, because I had learned as we walked through those last few months as Mike was commissioner, that there were going to be things said that I wanted to relive through a recording. And we talked about our work for 13 years. We actually were friends back to the mid-90s before I ever worked with him. We had a little bit of that. We talked about the work together. And then we talked kind of about the future. And he had this really tough battle with cancer and was bouncing back. And we sadly lost him in just a few years later in 2018. But that 45 minutes was the most rewarding 45 minutes I've had in this physical space, just to talk. We were friends, and then he was the boss, and then we had some time as colleagues yet again. And he talked about what working here had meant to him. He talked about what working with me was like. I talked about what working with him was like. We talked about some of the hard moments that we had shared and some of the good moments and some of the tough stuff laying ahead that we're still dealing with to this day. And that wasn't about decision making. I'll tell you, the very first day that I was in the office, I spent the day writing letters, actually handwritten notes to people who impacted me along the way. I found a former teacher, my college baseball coach, my freshman year at Laterno College, an author named John Ortberg, some of my former bosses that I'd reached out to that had helped mentor me in little ways along the way. And I'd love to say that, I did a TV deal, or we had a new sponsor, or we figured out solutions, but it was that first day was a day to write some people to express my appreciation for their support along the journey.
All right, we'll let you get out of here on this. The CALS audience is comprised of emerging leaders and aspiring athletic directors. What's your message to that audience on how they can best prepare and develop themselves to become healthy and effective leaders, equipped to lead people well and to tackle these myriad of challenges that we're facing in the industry today?
Some of the lessons I've learned, one is, you cannot lead people if you're not healthy yourself. And that is healthy in your relationships, healthy in your emotions, and healthy from a faith and physical standpoint. And again, the intensity of what we do, it's easy to put all of those aside. And I learned a tough lesson in my early 30s about that from a health standpoint. So how do you manage the intensity and the emotions? How do you find the opportunity to take a step back? Because it's not valid that you can just go hard 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. So how do you create breaks, and how do you take care of yourself physically in that experience? So that's one big bucket. I think a second is the importance of investing in yourself. When I speak to groups of young leaders or emerging leaders, one of the things I never did is I never asked, what are you going to do of a boss to help me develop? Now, I would explore development opportunities, but I wasn't going to give away responsibility for my own personal and professional development to someone else, like to wait for the corporate training or whatever special speaker may come in. How could I go carve out time to go to a leadership event, or go meet someone who I could ask some questions of over coffee or lunch? The reading is about personal growth. It's about lifelong learning. And it goes back to a conversation, a third point. My first boss, my first day of work, asked me when I'm going to start my master's degree. I could go to Syracuse on remitted tuition when I was working at a place called Utica College. I said, I'm tired of reading the books everybody makes me read. I'm going to take a year off. read the books I want to read, and then I'll re-engage in grad school. And he said, if you don't start now, you never will. And I went and I enrolled and I started. That was the best advice ever. And you think about timing and opportunities. Had I waited, I think I'd be successful and hopefully effective. I might not be here. And so I think the pursuit of that graduate degree, particularly if you're going to work in college athletics and try to distinguish yourself and open up opportunities, is really important. And the sooner you get after that, the better. And I'll finish with this, and I could go on with some points. You know, they're going to be dark and hard days. And so I talked about taking care of yourself, investing in yourself, getting after that graduate degree is pretty narrow. There are going to be dark days in the work. And so who around you is a base of support when the days are really long and the moments are dark? Who do you go to? My relationship with my wife is part of that. I have a set of friends who work outside the business that I call from time to time and say, hey, how does this look to you? Or I'm dealing with this problem when you led your corporation, or as you lead your corporation. Do you have similar issues or something close? And how do you think through it? You need people around you when the moments are going to be really difficult to try to help inflate your attitude, your perspective, and spirit. But also, they can speak truth to you. So this isn't all about fluff. You know, there's times when you can talk to somebody about a problem and they say, maybe you're the problem. And I think we all need to hear that from moment to moment.
That's great insight. Well, Commissioner, on behalf of Will and the CALS community, we want to thank you for taking the time to visit with us today. We appreciate your continued leadership in the SEC and across college athletics, and we look forward to visiting with you again soon. Hope you have a great spring.
Thanks, Ryan. Good to be with you, and I hope there's some benefit for everyone in this conversation.
Absolutely.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us in the lobby as part of the CALS report. My name is Jessie Gardner, and I'm the Executive Senior Associate AD for Leadership and Culture Development at the University of North Texas, also serve as our Senior Woman Administrator. And joining me today is Joe Fields, Deputy Director of Athletics and Chief Operating Officer at the University of Tulsa. We also have Jana Woodson, who is the Deputy Athletic Director of External Operations at Tulane University. Joe and Jana, thank you all for coming on and sharing your insight, experience, and expertise today. How are we feeling? How's the vibe check going?
Feeling great, feeling honored. Pleasure to kind of had this opportunity to share and visit with you all and share with the CALS community.
Yeah, happy Thursday. It's good to be with you guys. When I saw the folks that I was going to be with, I said, this is going to be a fun 30, 40 minutes. So let's get it. Yeah, it's going to be good.
Yeah, and Jana, I'm sure your schedule isn't busy at all with the Super Bowl in town this week. So a lot of excitement probably around the city.
Yeah, it's very busy. If you guys hear sirens going by, don't be alarmed. Everything is fine. But yeah, no, it's fun to have big events in your city, especially big sporting events in your city. So you can see a lot of your colleagues in town and partners and just an overall excitement. So yeah, it's a great week here.
All right, we can't bet, but who we got for the win?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to Eagles all the way. I got to go with a quarterback behind them in my former institution at Alabama. So cheering for Jalen.
That's awesome.
Yeah, personally, I'm taking the Eagles too because I'm lifelong Denver Broncos fan, so it makes it hard to cheer for the Chiefs.
Well, that's great. It's going to be a great podcast. We're on the line, man. I'm with the Eagles as well.
From the start. Well, I love to hear that. Well, to set the foundation for our conversation, we are going to be talking about career advice today, which we will all have a lot of different experiences to share. But I really want to set the foundation by allowing us some time to share a little bit of a highlight of our career path. So including kind of like what your ambition is forward. So we'll start with you, Joe, if you want to take about 30 seconds or so just to give us a little bit of insight.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe Fields, Deputy Athletics Director, Chief Operating Officer here at the University of Tulsa, but originally from Houston, Texas. Went up to Syracuse University on a football scholarship. Was fortunate enough to have a cup of coffee with the Carolina Panthers. And when I transitioned out of sport, went back up to Syracuse to start my professional career. Initially started off there as a graduate assistant, got my first full-time opportunity at Syracuse and kind of worked my way up in the academic student athlete development realm. Syracuse was really impactful for me on several levels, obviously as a student athlete and breaking into the profession. And then also, then I had the fortune of transitioning over to Texas A&M, which was equally as fruitful for me. I went there as the associate AD for academic support services and was fortunate enough to receive a few promotions to senior associate AD, deputy athletics director, executive associate AD, doing a lot of different things, wearing a lot of different hats, served as a sport administrator there, worked with the academic student athlete development RAM, name, image, likeness, Letterman's Association, equipment apparel. I did a lot at Texas A&M and had the great fortune of working with a lot of incredible professionals, which was also just as rewarding. Scott Woodward, who's currently at LSU, Ross Burek, who's currently at Ohio State, Stephanie Ramp at Nevada, and then also the great fortune of meeting Justin, and who's our current athletics director here at TU, and making a move over here with him. He's awesome. He's been great to me, my family. He's a superstar, and a lot of the things that we're doing here at TU, I think will be really apparent soon under his leadership. And so that's been my journey so far. Been done a lot of different things, then worked with a lot of amazing professionals. And so been fruitful, and I'm grateful for my journey thus far.
I'll go next, Jessie.
Yep.
Just
Go
give
for
out. So I am from the state of Kansas, born and raised there, went to the University of Kansas, was a sports management major. And so then did my internship at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Was blessed enough to be able to stay on there and get my first full-time real job, big people job, being the director of marketing. So I've always been on the external side in my career path. So I started as the director of marketing there, then was fortunate and blessed to go to the University of Richmond, where I oversaw ticketing and marketing. Was there for 8 years and got to do a lot of different things, building stadiums and renovating places and all those sort of different aspects. Then I moved on to Rice University. I was there as overseeing video and broadcasting and marketing there. And then 8 years ago, I came to Tulane University as our senior associate for external, overseeing all the different aspects of external, and then have been fortunate to get promoted here to deputy AD. Also, as Joe, been blessed along my journey to have a lot of great people in my path that have helped me continue to grow and challenge myself. And so have got extra things in each stop that I've been in. And I think that's one of the things that I think as you look at people and where they've been, whether it's Power Fours or Division I or Division II, things of that nature, I feel blessed in my journey to be at places where I could wear a lot of different hats and do a lot of different things. Because my ultimate goal is to sit in the chair one day. And so I feel like that's kind of made me have different perspectives to be able to look at it from a whole picture, because I've worn a lot of different hats. Even though I've come up through external, I've had the blessing of being able to see a lot of things. Yeah. So what about
That's
you?
Awesome. A lot of similar threads, right? I think we're going to be bringing up some of something that Jana just hit on, but Joe, you did too, about just the people, right? People are super important in the career advancement space. So I too was very blessed to have some people in my life that opened up doors and saw things in me and all kinds of things that really got me situated into this career that I've now, been a part of for a lot of years. So for me, I was a former student athlete at the University of Central Florida. Born and raised in Florida, never thought I'd leave the state, to be honest. Did my undergraduate work and my graduate work at the university. So loved it there, and really honestly was trying to get on in a position there after I graduated. And again, the right people in the right place, right? Trying to push you out and trying to, let you put your wings out there and go fly, right? They were trying to encourage me. And it was the best move I could have ever done. It's the coldest move I ever made, from Florida to Nebraska, and had the opportunity to continue working in student athlete development, which is really where, for me, my career has primarily come up on the internal side, right, in student athlete development. And so at Nebraska, I spent about 3 years there, incredible experiences, got to learn a lot from a really established program, and got to be a part of some really cool experiences. And then had the opportunity to come to a little bit of a warmer climate, which was a little more suitable for me, and spent about 8 years at the University of Alabama. Had a chance there to continue to really develop and grow a student athlete development program. Again, be a part of incredible opportunities, got to be a part of some great initiatives, and then got a call from Texas, which I never again thought that I'd be living in the state of Texas, but came here, and it's been incredible. Really continuing to hone that passion of mine in people development and really strategy and vision now in my role being on our executive leadership team. Having the opportunity to oversee several of our internal units, so academics, compliance, impact, as well as sport oversight for our volleyball program, serving as our senior one administrator, and being able to be a part of a lot of conversations from the conference office and a lot of our executive leadership and strategy. So been really great for me. I don't know that I necessarily see myself being in the chair. I haven't closed the door on that opportunity, but I know for me that the biggest thing is people and potential. And so those are really where my passions fall, and trying to figure out different opportunities I have to impact those spaces and make impact for other people. So it's still kind of figuring out what that next step might be. But as we're talking about that next step, I mean, really, I know for me personally, being a former student athlete, I got into being a graduate assistant in student athlete development, had no idea what it was. But for me, it was like, oh yeah, I want to help plan events. And so that's primarily why I was hired by Marcus Sedbury, who, you all name dropped a couple of people. He's another giant and really a mentor. He's the one that saw something in me and basically said, yeah, we'd love to have you kind of help plan these events. And he unlocked my eyes to this area in this field of passion that I just really loved, which was developing people. So I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I don't think that even when I left UCF, I still knew what I wanted to do. But would love to ask you all that. Did you always know that this career ambition and where you were trying to go is what you were trying to do? And what experiences really helped kind of shape your vision for your career?
Yeah, Joe, I'll tell you, Jessie, I was a pharmacy major at first. Yeah, how about that? At KU, and I played at JUCO. I played volleyball and softball at JUCO, and I went to KU. I tried to walk on the teams, and then I was a pharmacy major, and I got accepted in pharmacy school, and then I was like, I do not want to do this. And I went to the career counselor there when I was at Kansas, and they're like, well, what do you like? And I'm like, sports. That's like kind of all I know. And I was blessed that they had a sports management major at Kansas, and I kind of changed my path. And then I feel like from then I definitely knew what I wanted to do, right? I've always been this loudmouth person. So I was always on the working with fans and doing always wanted to be on the external and the marketing creative side. So, but it took me a minute to get there.
Yeah, no, I had no clue. I actually thought I was going to coach, and that was kind of the path I was going down. I thought I wasn't sure if it was going to try to do it at the collegiate level, break into the high school ranks. And so when I transitioned out of sport, I had no clue about athletic administration, and let alone kind of go down the academic student athlete engagement path. And if you've asked my academic advisors, they probably say it's the funniest thing, because as a former football student athlete, I was trying to figure out ways how to get out of academics and not see my academic advisor. And so the irony is that was my path, and I'm grateful. There's a lot of great professionals in the academic space, and shout out to N4A and all of the great things that they're doing to support student athletes in that realm. But absolutely, I would say being a student athlete, coming up the academic and student athlete development space has absolutely shaped my career. I think about everything from a student athlete development lens. I'm always thinking about what is in the best interest of our student athletes. I'm also recognizing that I value student athletes and a lot of the things that they bring to the table. And whether I'm looking to make a hire or just in my own day-to-day, I'm always looking for the hard work, the teamwork, the leadership, the confidence, the resiliency that I know sport teaches you. But also too, just as we make decisions for student athletes and for the greater good of our athletics departments, I'm always anchoring back to what's the right thing for our student athletes. How is this going to really drive success? How does this really impact their experience? And so I'm always trying to look at it through that lens, regardless of the space, regardless of where I started and the spaces that I now touch. I'm always trying to make sure that I'm putting that lens on it. And I know that comes from my time as a student athlete, and that comes from my journey and how I initially started in the profession.
And I want to point out something there that you said, and this goes back to what you said earlier, Jana, as well, but really about the exposure to different areas and how that then influences and impacts the way that you engage in the roles that you're in, right? So as people make transitions or growth, right, when you're talking about career advancement, which we'll get into even more, but a lot of that becomes valuable because it becomes a lens that now you see things through to have that perspective. So very, very neat. Jana, what about you?
I think that's right? Because you come up through a certain path at, like we talked about, a lot of different places, and that shapes kind of how you look at things. But as you also get into these leadership roles, you have people that didn't come up in the same path sitting next to you, right? And you have their lens on how they look at things. And that's what diversifying your senior staff and diversifying your overall staff and those different paths that they took and how their lens looks, what makes each athletics department better, right? Because yep. I might come in and say, hey, look at it from this perspective. We got to build revenue here and do these X, Y, and Z things. And Joe will say, okay, how about it from the student athlete side? And we'll say, yeah, okay, how do we marry those things together? And now we've got the winning formula, right, to picture it. So I think different perspectives are enormously important, but it's also what I've learned too, because I came up on such an external aspect, and then I started to oversee sports, that it's so important to have both perspectives, right? As you start to mold yourself too, right? So as you guys as we think about career advancement, and some of the folks maybe listening to this that are trying to ascend into the seats, like, I think that's a real important thing to think of is, hey, yeah, this is my path and this is where I'm really good, but it doesn't mean that you don't have other people there that can teach you the other side of it, so that you can be like, so you can sit in the chair or you can sit in one of these levels so you have this full broad perspective of what it is.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I also think that part of being a healthy organization is understanding how all of those pieces work together, mm-hmm. how external supports the internal piece, how sport administration supports academics and compliance, and how it all intertwines to allow us to operate at the highest possible level, and how there needs to be alignment, synergy. Everyone needs to know what we're anchoring back to. And I think all great athletics departments, all great organizations have that shared goal and know what role each entity plays into making that come to life.
Yeah, and I think it's also really important is as you continue to get into those different positions where, Jana, you just talked about, you came in on this side, but now you have an oversee or have impact in maybe more the internal side, is recognizing that you don't have to know everything, right? Like that's why you also position really good people in the positions that they're in, on whether it's your senior staff, your administrative staff, all the way down to maybe more your entry level positions, is being able to be humble enough to ask the questions and try to seek understanding rather than trying to act like you know everything out of whatever leadership and security that we all carry at some point in our career, right? That you don't have to know everything. And the goal is to really lean on those that do have the expertise in those areas. And that really is what creates a healthy department. I don't need to be the expert in everything. I need to be the expert in the things that I'm good at. And I need to have an awareness of the other things so I know how to help support and lead. But really being able to lean on some of those other people, which also gives them, I mean, we're talking about career advice. It also gives them more empowerment, right? To know that they are doing things in ways that will allow them to one day step into the next shoes that they want to be in, whatever their potential may call for. So when we're thinking about this, right? Like I know for me, kind of rising up, I just kind of talked about it, right? Is like, I had to go through a point in time where I recognize like I didn't need to know everything, but you feel the pressure like you have to. So with advancement, right, comes responsibilities. And when you think about how you navigate some of that development and some of that advancement, what has been critical to your success in advancing in leadership or responsibilities? Like what strategies have you engaged to position yourself really for that career advancement.
Yeah, I'll start this one. I would say for me, leadership is really, really important. It's something I take really seriously. I think who I'm led by is important. I think who I'm led by is what led me here to Tulsa and working with Justin. Um, and also, too, I'm really important about how I'm viewed and the leadership I'm providing others. I think that is really important for our student athletes and the staffs. We have their careers, we have their lives. In a lot of ways, we're shaping and molding those things. And so I don't think we should look at it as a check on the box for our resume, but really as the ultimate level of responsibility. And so I'm really big on that piece. But for me, as it relates to gaining leadership, gaining more responsibility, I think it always comes back to a couple things for me. It's results and impact. I think as I look back over the course of my career, as I've made great impact and as I've gotten really great results, I've received great opportunities. And so sometimes that might be financial, sometimes that might be entitled, but sometimes that might be with more responsibilities. And so I think all of them are important, and they don't always come together or at the same time. But I think they're all a reward of doing good work and making great impact. And so I'm really thoughtful with that, and I try not to overthink it. What's the job? How will success be measured? And go do a really good job and let the rest take care of itself.
Yeah, mine is very similar to that. I think results and impact, right? And for me, impact is really big. Is how am I helping us move the needle of our mission and really do what the vision and mission of our department is? Because everywhere you go, as you make transitions, right, it's going to be a little bit different. And one of the other things that I think empowers that too, for me, has always been really doing things with excellence. Like I do believe in holding myself to a high standard, but also the people around me. So when you talk about growing in leadership, that's a skill you have to learn. It's one thing to hold yourself to a high standard, but it's other, to be able to hold other people to a high standard, and just recognizing that kind of how you do anything is how you do everything, right? Not to be cliche and quotes, but when I was at my previous institution, a pretty well-known coach has a pretty known quote, but I've always really resonated with it. And it just said that mediocre people don't like high achievers and high achievers don't like mediocre people. And it's not that you hopefully don't have any kind of discourse in your department, but sometimes that rubbing, sometimes that challenge is good because it's growth, right? It's helping an institution continue to elevate and grow. And so just keeping that in mind, it helps me keep in check too. Like, am I continuing to push myself to be the best I can be? And am I showing up for others the way that is going to be best supportive for our department and create that impact? So I very much resonate with that results and impact.
Yeah, I think you guys are straight on. Like, I think that's exactly where I'm at too. The only thing I'll add to that is one of the big things for me in what I've learned as I've come up in the way of leadership is to be a good teammate. Like, it doesn't matter if you are the AD or the graduate assistant or the intern, like being a good teammate will make you a better leader in the long run, because have sympathy and for what this person does, for what your facilities people do every day, for what your graduate assistants do every day, for what your AD does every day, right? And if you're a good teammate and you don't mind picking up and helping them do what they do, and they help you, and then you have empathy for them, like your department is only as good as your weakest link that you have, right? And so if I'm a good teammate, the next time I need them to lift me up and make me a better teammate, that will respond to me. So I think that's the only other thing I would add, right? Like, being a good teammate is the thing that I learned. Like, when I was young in this business, I took myself way too seriously, right? Like, everything had to be perfect. Like, everything had to you just don't have time for that, right? And so what I learned quickly is, like, if I'm a good teammate and I do well, to your point, and I have impact and I continue to push, then everyone else around you is gonna do that, and you guys will all strive together.
Yeah, and it's a good point too. And I like, you make me think of somebody, a couple people in our department specifically, who part of being a good teammate sometimes is like volunteering or helping out in spaces that are not your normal responsibility. Which, when we're talking about advancement and how are you positioning yourself for more responsibilities and maybe a next step in leadership, that's one of the ways, right? Like show up for big events, like be a part of stuff where you can lend a hand and be an extra support system for the athletic department in those spaces. So I think that being a good teammate, I mean, it's invaluable to an organization, and you really hope that everybody that's part of an organization all want to be on that team, right? And be that good teammate.
What they call those and players. So really good at external and volunteers, and they're a really good teammate, and they're really compassionate for others in different areas. And so be really good at your job and be an and player, add value.
I love that, Joe. I've never heard that, so I'm taking that one. And players.
That's great, right? Because it's true, Joe, when you're going to call to hire someone and they say you're hiring for, name the position you're hiring for, right? And they say, their skills level on that is great. But you know what? The other thing they do is, and they start listing all those things, right? And you're like, bingo, this is my person, right?
Absolutely.
But if they can't say that and list the other things they do, and they say they're really good in this area and that's their bread and butter, you're going to hire the other person.
Those are butt people, right? So they're really good at this, but they're a little late, but they're a little tardy, but so we want and players, not butt players.
That's hilarious. Now that's a quote right there.
In this podcast, we're done.
I know it. Well, we did get some questions that were submitted by some of the CALS interns, which shout out to CALS, right? They have done some phenomenal things. There's so many great organizations we can be a part of, but CALS is so intentional, even in what they put on for us as administrators, to even give young individuals the opportunity to experience and connect with people that may hire them one day. So we'll kind of go around and just answer a little bit of the questions that were submitted. But Griffin Tucker from Oklahoma, who's a graduate assistant there, he said, we all have had people throughout our lives and careers that have helped us when we did nothing to deserve their help and who owed us nothing. What is the best way to repay or say thanks to those people who believed in us? I mean, first and foremost, the fact that she wants to have that gratitude and that excitement. Good for you, Griffin. That's awesome. Any ideas, Joe, Jana?
Yeah, I would say do good work. Prove them right. I think that's the ultimate way to pay anybody back that has believed in you is just do good work and show them that the things that they thought of you are absolutely spot on. And I would also say it never hurts to pick up the phone and say thank you.
Yeah, spot on. I agree with that. Say thank you. That's probably all they need. And then the second thing I would add is pay it forward. If somebody did that for you, make sure then you pay it forward and do that for somebody else, because that's really all that person wants, is that you continue to grow the industry and grow the people that are in it.
Yeah, I think I love both of those. I think I would add just, speak about them in the rooms that they're not in, give them their flowers maybe when you're talking to somebody and sharing about an experience you had or a learning you had, and being able to share that, because at some point, it's likely to get back to them, and hearing that you are just sharing about them. It's not something they didn't support you. They didn't do all these things for you with any insight that you'd have anything in return, but everybody loves to hear, some positive and encouraging news like that. So, and I also think it's just good as you continue in your career to send a note when you maybe do something and it reminds you of something you learned from them, because it just continues to show the impact. And I feel like so many of us are in this industry for that aspect of impact, right? You want to know that you've made a difference in somebody else's life, merely because that's just the heart that you have in leadership. So that would be the only other thing I add there.
All right, I got the next question. Who's got the next one? Me? All right, my question is from Drew Widmers at Kent State. He's a graduate assistant there. And he asks, how did you all prepare for being a sport administrator and taking on those important roles in supporting coaches and student athletes?
Well, there's no blueprint. I know that much. So the minute, that opportunity comes, which honestly, I think that there are programs out there and there are places that do try to develop people into that role, which I think is really positive, because you don't know what you don't know.
No handbook in this one.
There's no blueprint. I think for me, it was seeking from seeking out to learn from my network. The people that I know who have been sport oversights, who I know that they're coaches, that they have great respect and relationships with their coaches, just to learn, what are some of the things that maybe you did that made a difference? Like what are the pieces that helped establish trust early? And you have to remember when you're a sport oversight that you are an advocate for both the coaching staff, but also the students. So there is a fine line, right, in developing those relationships to really keep that balance, and at the same time build trust, build camaraderie, know that they want to know that you have their back and that the support is there, and then also I think one thing I learned, like a big learning for me, was making sure my AD, like knowing what my AD wanted to know versus what he didn't necessarily want to know, because, I'm taking care of the day-to-day needs of that team and that program. But, what are the things that he wants to know so he's not blindsided in a conversation or anything like that. So honestly, those are all things I've picked up from learning from people and then putting them into practice and gaining a little bit of experience myself.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. The only thing I would add is that I don't know that there's a blueprint or or prep work you could do to ultimately jump in there as a sport administrator. I would say that there's some characteristics and some traits that you need to make sure that you have mastered before you jump in there, and that's the ability to build relationships, a high level of emotional intelligence. You would need to exercise those things consistently. And then the only thing else I'll add is that there's levels, right? Like, and I shouldn't say levels. There's a difference at the P4 level. Working with football and basketball is a little different than working at the group of 5 level. And so knowing kind of those different parameters and, the chain of command and what needs to get up to the athletics director, what you need to handle as a true sport administrator. And so those things are really important. And so just kind of knowing the rules of engagement before you jump in there, building relationships, having a high level of emotional intelligence, and just knowing what the AD need to be privy to and what you need to handle as a sport administrator.
Yeah, I think you guys are spot on. I think the only thing I'll add is making sure that you're actually ready to take on a sport and be a sport supervisor, right? Making sure that your shop of what you oversee in the department is ready for you to take on that role, right? If you don't have your shop in order, and you don't have people that you can trust to take things, because being a sports supervisor can derail your entire calendar on a day if need be, right? And so you've got to be able to pivot and go there and do those things. And if everything else is going to stop because you can't be there during that day and your shop needs you to do that, then your group's not ready for you to be a sports supervisor because your shop still has to operate, right? So I had to learn that early. Like, I asked to be a sports supervisor when I first came here, and my AD, Troy Denon, was wise to say, your shop's not ready for you to be as a sport. You need to take care of that and get ready. And then when they are, then we'll do it. And that happened, right? So think about it not just on you. Yeah. When you want to be the sport administrator and you want to tell your AD you're ready, make sure that you really are ready. It would be my only thing I would add to what you guys said.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, awesome. Next question is from Kat Wallace at Mississippi State. She's a graduate assistant, and she's kind of talking about the next stage in her career. And her question is, how do you know what's the right next step position to take?
Do you ever know?
That's right. That's right.
You never know. I would say, Kat, you have some amazing professionals there at Mississippi State, starting with your athletics director and Zach and Terry, Joey, Christine. I know the Mississippi State crew. They're awesome people. So tap into those individuals. They'll provide great wisdom. But I would say one of the important parts is determining what's important to you. What are your goals? And then I think you measure those opportunities versus your goals. And it's okay to literally take out a sheet of paper, write pros and cons, and get back to the grassroots of what's important, like we were when we were younger and we were setting goals and compare and contrast what's important to you. And then most importantly, I would say trust your gut. Ultimately, you'll have a gut feeling regarding what's right, and trust that.
Yeah, I think, Joe, you're spot on. I would say you're going to spend a lot of hours working wherever you go in athletics, right? Right. We all know that. So it's about the people. So make sure that whatever position you take, you feel good about the people that you're going to have around you, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with them. And sometimes you don't always know that going on the interview. Everybody's great on their interview, right? Everybody, but again, being a graduate assistant, you have enough contacts where you are already that you can ask those questions. Hey, what do you know about the people at Tulsa? What do you know about the people at North Texas? I'm interviewing with Jessie, right? And you know enough people that will know somebody that knows the culture of that department and what it is and things of that nature. And so use your resources, because you're definitely going to want to know that you're going to a place that you feel good about.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times when I've interviewed individuals before and you ask them, like, do you have any questions for me? And they don't. And I'm like, this is such a missed opportunity. Like, you should always have questions, because the bottom line, just like when you're coming out of college, people tell you all the time, like, interview for the job themselves too. Like, you need to know who you're working for. And Jana, you nailed it right there. And just talking about that is, find out, use your network, find out who knows who, and make the connections and try to find out, like, what is it like working for them? And then ultimately, when you're in the interview or you're considering an opportunity, I think that's where you have to ask the hard questions that help give you an idea whether or not they align with who your values, your interests, your skill sets. Is the position going to align with your passions? I can't preach enough the importance of working under great leadership. And I heard a quote one time and it stuck with me forever. It will stick with me forever, but not to be enamored by the logo, but to be enamored by the leadership. And I think that is so very important, because when you are aligned with the leadership and who you're working for, and that could be your direct boss, but it could also be the entire department, depending on what level you're in, is you need to know that you believe in what your department's doing. So for me, coming up in student athlete development, it was important for me, no matter what level I was at, to know that the athletic director believed in the holistic development of student athletes. And if they didn't, and it seemed like it was a checked box, that was not an institution for me. So it's really important to understand what your values are, kind of what your passions are, and do your interests and your skills align, as well as being able to understand who you're going to work for. And really looking at a job, honestly, to me, is also looking at, like, knowing where you want to go. Is this going to be the next step that's going to get you to that step? You're not necessarily always just looking at the job in front of you. You got to look 2 or 3 down the road. And is this going to provide you the skill sets or the experiences and responsibilities that maybe you wouldn't have had otherwise, that will, help you get to that AD chair if that's what you're interested in. So I definitely think that there's some questions and things you can ask along the way that help give you some insight to really get to know that.
Yeah. And ultimately the job's going to be what you make of it, right? Yeah. And the attitude that you have as well. So if you get in there and get aligned with all of that, and then you go in with the right attitude to make it, it's perfect.
Absolutely. You win some, you learn some, right? So
that's right.
All right. Our last question to kind of close us out is from Liz Davis at Oklahoma, who is also a graduate assistant. This is a good one. She said, if you could give your younger self any advice, what would it be?
Joe, going first. His face looked like he had the answer, but he didn't.
No, I was thinking this is actually a really good one, and I would say it will be a journey, but the blessing is in the journey. A lot of individuals will pour into you. Be sure to pay it forward. There will be some good days, there will be some bad days, but you're built for it. And ultimately, when you get to where you're going, do it the right way. Do it the right way.
That's good. That's good advice. You're following it now, aren't you? I would, to my younger self, I would say, don't take yourself so seriously. And to make sure that you take the time to enjoy the small moments that you really love and why you do it. And take time for yourself when you need it.
Yeah, I love it. I think for me, I would say that be you, invest in getting to know you. That is something that, again, coming into student athlete development, people development space, I geek out over all those types of things. People are probably tired of me asking about the DISC assessment and Enneagram and all of this, but I think that it is to your competitive advantage when you know you. when you have an idea of what you are good at, what you are passionate about, what type of environments you really want to be in. I just think the more you know about yourself, the better it is as you evaluate opportunities and you try to figure out what you want your career path to be. So definitely investing in the time to get to know yourself and really who you are and what skill sets and talents and abilities that you bring would be mine. So all great advice, all things that you really only learn with experience, but hopefully we were able to give some insight to Liz and the other interns and the whole CALS community in those questions. So we are getting close to time, so I'm going to close us out, but as a follow-up, can expect an email with video and questions. Of course, an open invitation for any questions or clarifications. I really can't end this conversation out without sharing gratitude for the conversation, Joe and Jana. It's been really fun. This was actually a lot of fun, and really appreciate both of you for the leadership that you continue to engage in this industry, both on your campuses, but also across the industry in the different ways that you support and continue to really grow what we're doing in this field. So appreciate you both for being here today.
Likewise, Jessie.
Very, very excited for the interview with Commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. Greg Sankey is going to also be released, so we are excited about that. And so everyone will definitely take a listen. Hopefully, definitely take a listen. He has continued to be a voice in this industry, provides a lot of good insight. So very excited for that release as well. So
this one's a close second to that, guys. A close second.
Yeah, we are right there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Joe and Jana, it's been great. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and week, and good luck to all your sports teams.
Likewise.
It's been a pleasure. Good luck to you guys as well.
See y'all.
Thank you for tuning into episode 6 of the CALS Report. It's been a privilege to bring you an exclusive conversation with SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, diving into the future of college athletics, followed by an insightful discussion with Joe Fields, Jessie Gardner, and Jana Woodson in the lobby. A huge thank you to our guests for sharing their time, expertise, and leadership perspectives, and to all of you, our listeners, for being a part of these important conversations. The support of the CALS community continues to inspire us, and we're grateful for the engagement, passion, and commitment of those who are shaping the future of our industry. This episode of the CALS Report podcast has been brought to you by Teamworks, the industry leader in athlete and staff collaboration. With revenue sharing on the horizon, Teamworks GM streamlines decision-making, manages student-athlete contracts, and processes payments, all seamlessly integrated with your Teamworks suite. Learn more at teamworks.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the CALS Report on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And stay connected with us on LinkedIn and Instagram at the CALS Report and on Twitter at AD Symposium for the latest updates. For more information about CALS or to reach out, visit www.adsymposium.us. I'm Will Reese, and this has been the CALS Report. Until next time, stay connected and keep leading the way in college athletics.